Security, please remove them. The words were calm, polished, and expensive, the kind that carried weight in a room where every plate cost more than a week's groceries. Ethan Cole froze mid-step, one hand still wrapped around his daughter's small fingers as the late afternoon sun poured through the wide diner windows, catching dust in golden beams and glinting off polished silverware. The place was fuller than usual for a Tuesday in Cedar Ridge, bankers in tailored suits, a couple celebrating an anniversary, waitresses weaving between booths with coffee pots held high. And at the center of it all, beneath a chandelier that didn't belong in a small-town diner, sat Victoria Hale, billionaire, tech visionary, the woman whose face had been on the cover of Forbes just last month. Lily had been happily coloring a paper placemat only seconds earlier, her sneakers swinging 6 inches above the checkered tile floor, when she looked up, went completely still, and whispered one word. Mom. Ethan hadn't even had time to process it before she slipped from his grasp and ran. Chair scraped. A fork clattered onto porcelain. Lily darted between tables, her soft brown hair bouncing against her shoulders, and stopped at the edge of Victoria's private table, where crystal water glasses and untouched salmon rested beside leather-bound portfolios. She looked up with wide, certain eyes and said it again, louder this time. Mommy. The investors exchanged confused glances. One man coughed awkwardly. Another reached for his phone. Victoria's posture, straight as a steel beam moments before, went rigid. Her manicured hand hovered midair, champagne flute trembling just slightly as she stared down at the child standing inches from her tailored navy suit. Ethan stepped forward, heat rising behind his collar. Lily, he said softly. Sweetheart, come back. But Lily didn't move. She reached up instead, placing her tiny palm against Victoria's wrist like she had known it forever. You found us, she said with a trembling smile. A murmur rippled across the diner. Someone whispered, Is this a setup? Another voice muttered, Gold digger. Ethan felt every syllable like a weight pressing against his chest, but he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked toward the table, steady and quiet, the way a man walks when he has nothing to prove and everything to protect. Sir, one of the investors said sharply, adjusting his cufflinks. This is a private meeting. Ethan, not at once. We're not here to cause trouble. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, a pickup truck rumbled past on Main Street. Inside, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Victoria finally lowered her glass. Her eyes, sharp and calculating in boardrooms across the country, now searched the child's face with something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Lily tilted her head, studying her like children do when they recognize something adults have long buried. Daddy says you're brave, she whispered. The room went still in a way that didn't feel accidental. Not awkward, not loud, just still. And for the first time since she had stepped into the spotlight of this town, Victoria Hale looked less like a billionaire and more like a woman staring at a truth she could not immediately dismiss. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, like wind changing direction across an open field. One of the investors cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan as if calculating risk. Another whispered something about headlines and reputation. A server stood frozen beside the coffee station, pot tilted midair, uncertain whether to refill cups or step away entirely. Victoria slowly withdrew her wrist from Lily's small hand, not abruptly, not harshly, but carefully, as if afraid that even the slightest movement might shatter something fragile in the air. This is inappropriate, one of the men at the table said, his tone clipped and controlled. Ms. Hale has a schedule. Ethan gave a single nod. We will leave, he said quietly. I am sorry for the interruption. He reached for Lily again, but she held her ground, her fingers curling into the edge of Victoria's sleeve. Daddy, wait, she pleaded softly. She looks like me. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Victoria's jaw tightened, but her eyes did not leave the child's face. Up close, the resemblance was not loud or obvious. It was subtle, the shape of the chin, the faint curve at the edge of the eyebrows. A familiarity that felt less like coincidence and more like memory knocking at a door long sealed. What is your name? Victoria asked, her voice lower now, stripped of its boardroom sharpness. Lily Cole, the girl answered proudly. I am 6. I can read chapter books. A faint, Almost invisible tremor passed through Victoria's expression at the last name. Cole. The investors exchanged looks. Again, more serious this time. One leaned forward and said under his breath, "Victoria, we should step outside." But she did not move. Ethan felt the weight of every stare pressing against him. He could almost hear the judgments forming, the assumptions building. A small-town mechanic walks into a Billionaire'S meeting with a child calling her mother. It sounded like a story designed for scandal. He straightened his shoulders, not defensively, but with quiet steadiness. "Lily," he said gently, kneeling beside her so they were eye level. "Sometimes adults need time to understand things." Lily looked between them, confusion flickering across her face. "But you said she was brave," she whispered. Victoria inhaled sharply, as if that word carried more history than anyone else in the diner could understand. Brave. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, a delivery truck reversed with a soft beeping sound. Inside, no one touched their food. Victoria finally stood, her chair sliding back across the tile with a slow scrape that seemed louder than it should have been. She looked at Ethan fully now, really looked at him, as if searching through years in a matter of seconds. "Did you know I would be here today?" she asked. Her tone was controlled, but something beneath it trembled. Ethan shook his head once. "No," he met her gaze without challenge, without accusation. "We just came for pancakes." The simplicity of the answer hung in the air, heavier than any elaborate explanation could have been. And for the first time since the child had spoken, doubt began to replace suspicion in the eyes of the room. The word pancakes lingered in the air longer than it should have, simple and ordinary against the polished weight of investment portfolios and million-dollar negotiations. One of the men at the table let out a quiet scoff. "You expect us to believe this is random?" he asked, folding his hands carefully. Ethan did not react to the tone. He remained kneeling beside Lily, one steady hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "I do not expect you to believe anything," he said calmly. "I only expect you to listen." The diner felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves had leaned in. Victoria's gaze did not leave Ethan's face. The years had added faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind carved by sun and responsibility rather than comfort. He looked older than she remembered, not weaker, just worn in the way honest men become worn. 6 years, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. 6 years ago you disappeared. Ethan's expression did not harden. It softened. "No," he replied. "You left." A subtle shift passed through the room. The investors no longer looked amused. They looked uncertain. Victoria inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "You never called," she said. "You changed your number." "I kept the same number," Ethan answered. "I called 3 times. Your assistant said you were traveling. Then the articles came out. The merger. The move to San Francisco." He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He stated facts the way a mechanic lists parts needed for a repair. Lily looked between them, sensing something heavy but not understanding it. "Daddy keeps a picture of you in the garage," she said suddenly. "By the red toolbox." A server near the counter covered her mouth softly. Victoria blinked, the composure she had built over years of boardroom battles flickering at the edges. "A picture?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. "From the county fair. The Ferris wheel. You were laughing at something I said." Victoria's eyes dropped for a brief moment. Memory moved across her face like a cloud passing over sunlight. Cedar Ridge County Fair. Summer air thick with popcorn and country music drifting from tin speakers. A younger version of herself who still believed she could build an empire without sacrificing anything personal. "I thought you were ashamed of me," she admitted quietly. "After the investors met you at the shop. After they laughed." Ethan shook his head. "I was never ashamed." 3 short sentences. No hesitation. No pride. Just truth. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A coffee cup trembled as someone set it down too hard. Victoria looked at Lily again, really looked this time, noticing the small birthmark just below her left ear. A crescent shape. Familiar. Her breath caught, not dramatically, but deeply, as recognition settled into something undeniable. She reached out, hesitant, and brushed a strand of Lily's hair back from her cheek. The gesture was careful, almost reverent. "When is your birthday?" she asked softly. "March 12th, Lily answered without thinking. The exact date struck like quiet thunder. Victoria's fingers stilled. 6 years ago. March. The timeline aligned in a way that no accusation could. Manufacture. Around them, the diner was no longer whispering. It was waiting. And for the first time since the child had spoken, the possibility that this was not manipulation, not strategy, but something far more human began to take root in every watching eye. The date did not echo loudly, yet it settled over the diner like a verdict no one had spoken aloud. March 12th. Victoria's hand remained suspended near Lily's cheek, her polished composure thinning with every quiet second that followed. One of the investors shifted in his chair. Another closed his leather folder slowly, no longer pretending to review numbers. Ethan rose to his feet, steady and unhurried, placing himself beside his daughter without shielding her, without staking claim. He simply stood there, present. "You said you were leaving town for 2 weeks, Victoria said, her voice lower now, stripped of authority and edged with something almost fragile. "After the fair." Ethan nodded. "My father had a stroke. I drove to Kansas overnight. I tried calling you from the hospital parking lot." He did not dramatize it. He did not embellish. He offered the memory plainly, the way a man recounts a fact he has carried for years without anyone asking. Victoria swallowed. "I never received a message. Your assistant told me you were in negotiations overseas," Ethan replied. "She said it was not a good time." 3 short sentences. No accusation. Just the weight of missed timing. Lily looked up at them both, her small fingers now wrapped around the edge of the tablecloth. "Are you mad at Daddy?" she asked softly. Victoria's expression broke in the smallest way at the question. "No," she answered quickly. "No, sweetheart." The word sweetheart slipped out naturally, unplanned, and the investors noticed. The room noticed. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Main Street. Inside, the scent of syrup and fresh coffee seemed strangely distant. "I found out I was pregnant a month after you left," Victoria said quietly, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "But by then the board had voted. The relocation was final. My life was already moving at 100 miles per hour." She inhaled slowly. "I convinced myself you would not want this." Ethan did not flinch. "You convinced yourself," he repeated gently. No sharpness. No blame. Just reflection. Victoria looked down at Lily again, at the crescent birthmark below her ear, at the familiarity that was no longer subtle. Her voice trembled for the first time. "I thought choosing my career meant losing everything else." Lily tugged lightly at her sleeve. "Daddy says you build things," she said proudly. "Big things." A faint, almost broken smile touched Victoria's lips. "Sometimes," she whispered. Ethan met her gaze fully now. "I never asked you to choose," he said. "I only asked you to tell the truth." The words landed softly, but they carried more force than any raised voice could have. Around them, the diner had fallen completely silent. No phones lifted. No whispers lingered. Just a room full of strangers witnessing something too honest to interrupt. Victoria straightened slowly, the billionaire composure returning not as armor, but as clarity. She looked at her investors, then back at Ethan and Lily. And for the first time in years, the most important decision in her life was not about markets, mergers, or margins. It was about courage. Victoria did not sit back down. She did not reach for her glass. Instead, she stepped away from the polished edge of the investor table and into the open space between booths, as if distance from the contracts might help her see more clearly. "Excuse us," one of the investors began, his voice tightening, but she lifted a single hand, not dramatically, just enough to pause him. "This will only take a moment," she said. The authority in her tone had not vanished. It had shifted. Ethan watched her carefully, not with hope, not with fear, but with a restraint learned from years of raising a child alone. Lily's small hand slipped into his again, warm and steady. Victoria turned back toward them, the late afternoon light outlining her figure against the diner windows. "If what you are saying is true," she began slowly, choosing each word, "then you carried this alone for 6 years." It was not an accusation. It was recognition. Ethan nodded once. "I carried her," he said softly, glancing down at Lily with a quiet smile. "And she carried me." 3 simple sentences. No bitterness. No demand. A server near the counter wiped at her eyes discreetly. One of the older men in the corner removed his cap and set it on the table. Victoria's composure flickered again, not from pressure, but from understanding. "Why did you not come to me?" she asked. You could have asked for support. For anything. Ethan's gaze remained level. I did not want anything, he replied. Not money. Not headlines. I wanted her to grow up knowing she was chosen, not negotiated. The words landed with a weight that even the investors could not dismiss. A man who had built his life around valuations shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lily looked up at Victoria, her eyes wide and hopeful. Daddy reads to me every night, she said proudly. Even when he is tired. Victoria's throat tightened. She imagined bedtime stories in a small bedroom above a mechanic shop, oil stains on denim, fairy tales spoken in a steady voice. A life she had never seen. A life she had unknowingly missed. I never stopped thinking about Cedar Ridge, she admitted quietly. I told myself it was nostalgia, that it was small-town sentiment. She looked at Ethan directly now. Maybe it was something else. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. A clock near the register ticked audibly, marking seconds that felt larger than minutes. One of the investors leaned forward. Victoria, he said carefully, we can reschedule this discussion. She did not take her eyes off Ethan. Yes, she answered without hesitation. We can. The decision was simple. Clear. Not theatrical. She knelt slowly so that she was level with Lily, careful not to wrinkle her tailored suit, though it no longer seemed to matter. March 12th, she said softly, brushing a fingertip near the crescent birthmark again. That is a beautiful birthday. Lily smiled. Daddy makes pancakes with chocolate chips. Victoria's breath trembled into something almost like a laugh, fragile and unfamiliar. She looked up at Ethan, and for the first time since she had built an empire from spreadsheets and steel determination, her voice held no calculation. I do not know how to undo 6 years, she said, but I would like to start with the truth. And in that quiet diner, beneath the hum of ordinary lights and the scent of ordinary coffee, a billionaire chose something that could not be measured in dollars. She chose courage. The word truth lingered in the air long after Victoria spoke it. It was not a dramatic declaration. It was quiet, intentional, the kind of word that demanded action instead of applause. Ethan studied her for a long moment, measuring not her wealth, not her status, but her steadiness. Lily remained between them, her small fingers still wrapped around his hand, unaware that the entire room had shifted its understanding of what mattered. One of the investors stood slowly, clearing his throat. Victoria, perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere private, he suggested carefully. His voice no longer carried irritation. It carried caution. Victoria rose from her kneeling position and faced him. There is nothing private about responsibility, she replied evenly. And there is nothing inappropriate about honesty. The statement was calm, but it traveled across the diner like a line drawn in sand. The investors fell silent. Ethan exhaled slowly. We did not come here to change your life, he said. We came for pancakes. The simplicity of it landed again, steady and unshaken. Victoria looked at him with something deeper now. You may not have come to change my life, she answered softly. But you already have. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. A clock near the register ticked past 4:30 in the afternoon. Outside, Main Street traffic moved as it always did, unaware that inside this small diner, time felt suspended. What happens now? Lily asked, her voice gentle but curious. Victoria crouched slightly, so that she was closer to the child's height again, though she did not kneel this time. Now, she said carefully, we listen to each other. She turned to Ethan. If you are willing. Ethan did not hesitate. I am willing, he replied. But it has to be slow. She deserves stability. 3 short sentences. Clear boundaries. No fear. No negotiation. Victoria nodded. Agreed. A faint murmur of approval passed through a few tables. The older man in the corner gave a subtle nod. A waitress placed fresh coffee on an untouched table, her hands no longer trembling. The tension that had filled the room earlier had transformed into something quieter. Respect. Victoria looked back at her investors. Gentlemen, we will reconvene tomorrow, she said. Family comes first. No one argued. They gathered their folders without protest, glancing once more at Ethan as if reassessing a man they had misjudged minutes before. When the last briefcase clicked shut, the room felt larger again. Not louder, just clearer. Victoria stepped closer to Ethan, leaving enough space to honor his steadiness. I do not want to disrupt what you built, she said. I only want the chance to know her. Ethan searched her face for any trace of performance. He found none. Then you show up, he answered quietly. Not as a headline. Not as a benefactor. As her mother. The word hung gently between them. Victoria inhaled, the weight of it settling not as pressure, but as purpose. Then I will show up, she said. And for the first time in 6 years, the future did not look like a balance sheet or a risk assessment. It looked like 3 people standing in a small-town diner, choosing dignity over pride and beginning again. The investors filed out quietly, the soft click of polished shoes against tile fading toward the glass doors. No one rushed. No one lingered. The spectacle they had expected had dissolved into something they could not monetize or control. When the last briefcase disappeared onto Main Street, the diner exhaled. Plates clinked again. A coffee maker hissed. Ordinary life resumed. But it felt different now, as if everyone present had witnessed something they would carry home with them. Victoria turned back toward Ethan and Lily, no longer framed by executives or expectations. Just a woman standing in a small-town diner at 4:45 in the afternoon, sunlight stretching long across the checkered floor. May I sit? She asked softly. It was not a demand. It was permission requested. Ethan studied her for a brief second, then nodded toward the booth where Lily's half-colored placemat still waited. You can, he said. 3 short words. Calm. Measured. Victoria slid into the vinyl seat across from them, smoothing her jacket without thinking. Lily climbed back onto her side of the booth, sneakers tapping lightly against the base. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence was no longer tense. It was careful. Victoria looked at the crayon drawing on the table. A stick figure with brown hair stood beside a smaller figure in a blue dress. Above them, a third figure had been drawn faintly, as if added later. Is that me? Victoria asked gently. Lily nodded. I drew you from the picture in the garage, she said. Daddy says you like the Ferris wheel. Ethan glanced down at the drawing, then back at Victoria. There was no embarrassment in his expression, only honesty. She asked about you, he explained. I never lied. Victoria's eyes shimmered, though she blinked the moisture away quickly. Thank you, she said. It was not grand. It was sincere. A waitress approached cautiously. More coffee? She asked Ethan. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Victoria smiled faintly at the familiar tone. No assistance. No filtered water poured from crystal bottles. Just refilled mugs and chipped ceramic plates. What is she like? Victoria asked after a moment, her attention returning fully to Lily. Ethan answered without hesitation. She likes chapter books, strawberry ice cream, and Saturday mornings at the park. She does not like thunderstorms. He paused, then added gently, she is braver than she thinks. Victoria listened as if memorizing a briefing more important than any corporate presentation. Lily leaned forward across the table. Are you staying in town? She asked. Victoria hesitated, then answered truthfully. I was not planning to. She glanced at Ethan. But plans can change. Ethan did not smile widely. He did not celebrate. He simply nodded once, acknowledging possibility without surrendering caution. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting amber light through the windows. Inside, 3 people sat in a booth that had once felt too small for ambition, now just large enough for something quieter, something steadier. And in that ordinary space, beneath humming lights and the scent of fresh coffee, the beginning did not look dramatic. It looked deliberate. The late afternoon light deepened into amber as the diner thinned out, the after-work rush replaced by a softer hum of conversation and clinking dishes. Victoria sat with her hands folded on the table, no longer checking a phone, no longer glancing at a watch. Time, for once, was not something she needed to manage. It was something she needed to honor. I have a driver waiting, she said quietly. He can leave. Ethan looked at her steadily. You do not need to prove anything today, he replied. Showing up once is not the same as staying. 3 short sentences. Clear. Grounded. Victoria nodded, accepting the boundary instead of resisting it. Then let me start small, she said. She reached into her purse, not for a checkbook, not for a business card embossed in silver, but for a simple pen. She turned Lily's placemat over and wrote a number carefully, each digit deliberate. This is my personal line, she explained. No assistance. No filters. If she wants to call, she calls me. Lily leaned across the table, studying the numbers as if they were treasure. Can I call tonight? She asked eagerly. Victoria smiled. A real smile this time, unpolished and warm. Yes, she answered. But only if your father says it is all right. She looked at Ethan when she said it, and the respect in the gesture did not go unnoticed. Ethan considered the moment, then gave a slight nod. After dinner, he said. Lily clapped softly, her excitement small but bright. The waitress returned with a plate of pancakes that had long gone cold. On the house, she said gently, placing them between them as if sealing a quiet blessing over the table. Victoria glanced at the plate and then at Ethan. You said chocolate chips, she recalled. Ethan allowed himself the faintest smile. It is tradition. Victoria picked up a fork and, without ceremony, took a bite. No hesitation. No concern for image. Just participation. The gesture was small, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. But the room was paying attention. An older couple near the window exchanged knowing glances. A teenager behind the counter whispered, "That is her," and then fell silent again. Victoria set the fork down and looked at Lily. Would you like to show me the park on Saturday? She asked. The question was cautious, offered like a fragile bridge. Lily looked to Ethan immediately. Ethan held her gaze for a second, then answered for both of them. If you come as yourself, he said. Not as a headline. Victoria understood. No cameras, she replied. No press. 3 short promises. Clear. Measured. The sun dipped lower, painting the diner in gold and shadow. Victoria rose slowly from the booth. I have meetings to reschedule, she said. But I will be back before Saturday. She looked at Ethan, not with apology alone, but with intention. This time I am not leaving without telling you. Ethan stood as well, steady and composed. That is all I ever asked. No dramatic embrace followed. No grand declaration. Just 3 people standing in a small-town diner, choosing to build something carefully instead of reclaiming it loudly. And as Victoria stepped toward the door, the bell above it chiming softly, the silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was hopeful. The bell above the diner door gave one last gentle chime as Victoria stepped outside into the fading light, her silhouette briefly framed against the amber sky of Cedar Ridge. Through the wide front window, Ethan watched her pause on the sidewalk, speaking quietly to the driver beside a sleek black sedan. There were no flashing cameras, no waiting reporters. Just Main Street settling into evening, storefront lights flickering on one by one. Lily climbed onto the booth seat and pressed her palms against the glass. She is really coming back, right? She asked, her voice small but hopeful. Ethan moved beside her, resting a steady hand on her back. She said she would, he answered. 3 simple words. No promises beyond what was spoken. Outside, Victoria looked back once. Not dramatically, not as a billionaire surveying property. As a woman memorizing a window where her child stood watching. When their eyes met through the glass, she lifted a hand in a small wave. Lily waved back with both arms, unfiltered joy lighting her face. The car door closed softly. The sedan pulled away at a measured pace, turning left at the corner where the old hardware store still displayed red, white, and blue bunting from last summer. Inside, the diner returned to its usual rhythm. A cook called out an order. A spoon clinked against a ceramic mug. The world did not stop because something important had happened. It simply absorbed it. Ethan guided Lily back into the booth and sat across from her. The plate of pancakes remained between them, chocolate chips melting into quiet pools. Daddy, Lily said, picking at the edge of the placemat where the phone number was written. Does this mean I have 2 homes? Ethan considered the question carefully. It means you have more people who love you, he replied. Where you live will always be where you are safe. 3 short sentences. Clear. Grounded. Lily nodded, satisfied with that answer, and took a bite of cold pancake as if it tasted better now. The waitress approached with the check, then hesitated. It is already taken care of, she said gently. Ethan frowned slightly. I did not see her pay. The waitress smiled knowingly. She paid before she stood up. Ethan looked down at the table, then toward the door, understanding settling in. Not charity. Not spectacle. Quiet responsibility. He placed a $20 bill beneath the plate anyway. For the staff, he said simply. Dignity does not compete. It complements. Outside, the sky shifted from gold to deep blue, the first evening stars. Faint above the water tower on the edge of town. Ethan rose and took Lily's hand. As they stepped toward the door, conversations softened around them. Not out of gossip. Out of respect. The bell chimed again as they walked into the cooling air. Lily squeezed his fingers. "She looks like me," she whispered. Ethan glanced down at her, his expression calm but warm. "You look like yourself," he corrected gently. And as they walked down Main Street toward a small apartment above a mechanic shop, there was no parade, no applause. Just a father and his daughter moving forward with steady steps, knowing that sometimes grace does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits across from you in a diner, chooses truth, and leaves the room quieter than it found it.